So now looking at example 5, so we're going to look at, is the statement a true or false statement? So if it's true, you should really be able to defend why your statement is true. And if it's false, you should be able to explain why it's false. So looking at the graph, we are looking at part A, the limit as x is approaching -1 from the right. So let's first figure out where -1, x equals -1 is. So we locate it. If we're coming in on the right, it's saying that we're hitting a y value of 1. So if we're coming in, following that graph as we get closer and closer to this x equals -1 on the right, is that y value you're getting closer and closer to 1? And it is. So as we're coming in, our y value is going to 1. So this is true. So as x is approaching 2, there's no superscript of the plus or the negative sign on that 2. So we want to make sure left and right are the same. So as x is approaching 2, so let's look at x equals 2. Look at the graph coming in on the left and the right. Are you getting closer and closer to the same y value? And we are. And that y value that we're getting closer and closer to, even though it's not defined there, it's getting closer and closer to that y value of 2. So that is actually a true statement also. And then it's saying, let's look at the limit as x is approaching 1. Let's look at x equals 1. The negative superscript is saying that we're coming in on the left of this 1. Is that equal to 1? So coming in on the left, following that graph on the left of x equals 1, is that y value you're getting closer and closer to also 1? And it is. So this is true. Looking at D, look at the limit as x is approaching 1 on the right. Does that give you a y value of 2? So if we're coming in to 1 on the right-hand side, that y value that we're approaching is 2. So that is true. Now let's look at the limit as x is approaching 1 of f of x does not exist. Well, in order for it not to exist, the left and right-hand side have to be different. Well, x approaching 1 on the left, we said was 1. And the limit as x is approaching 1 on the right-hand side is 2. So it's true that the limit doesn't exist because left and right are different. And then the limit as x is approaching 0 from the left of f of x is equal to the limit as x is approaching 0 from the right of f of x. So I'm looking at this, locating x equals 0, well, that's the origin, and is the left-hand side and the right-hand side coming into the same y value? And it is. So this is also true. And G, the limit as x is approaching 2 of f of x does not exist. If you look at it as x is approaching 2 on the left, there's an open circle there, but we're getting closer and closer to that same y value there of 2. And as we're coming in on the right-hand side, as we're getting closer and closer to x equals 2 there, we're also getting 2. And so even though that point is undefined, the limit does exist. And so this is actually a false statement. I would say the limit as x is approaching 2 of f of x. In our case, we can say is equal to the y value of 2.
I think it is better to print out the papers because
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I'd be able to write and then understand it later.
Yeah, so in this way, in this case, this one's kind of helpful to have printed out just because it has all those graphs in there. And so sometimes it takes a while just to copy down the graphs. Let me scroll down and I'm going to give you guys a chance to go through and see if you could do one on your own. And then let me fix this so you can see it all. Maybe. Okay, so why don't you guys just try it? Go ahead and try number one, and I'll zoom that in a little more. And I'll give you about 5 minutes to see how much you can do, and then we'll talk about it. If you have a chance, you can work at the more on the ones below if you're fast at this. So I'm gonna stop the recording or pause the recording so that you can work on it. If you're watching this recording at a later time, then just pause the recording so that you can try it on your own and then watch. Okay, so you had a chance to look at it, and I just asked you to put in the answer for problem one in the chat. And some of you had said 3, and some of you had said 1. And the answer for 1A was what I was talking about. But anyway, so 1A says limit as x is approaching -1 on the left of f of x. So x equals -1. Determine where that is on your graph, which is right here. And then on the left, so I noticed that this graph jumps. So it's a different piece on the left than it is on the right. So since it's on the left of it, I have to look at the piece on the left. And what is that y value as we get closer and closer to it on the left-hand side of x equals -1? Well, it's an open circle, so it means it's never going to hit that value, y value of 3 here, but it's going to get so close to that x equals 3 on that left-hand side that we can say that that limit is 3. So those of you who said 3, that was correct. If we were looking at it as coming in on the right-hand side, was that any of our things? Yeah, so that was G. So 1G, if we're coming in on the right-hand side as x equals -1, I would look at the piece directly to the right of it. And as I'm getting closer and closer to x equals -1, my y value that I'm hitting is +1. Okay, so part B, in the chat, what did you find f of 1 was? So f of 1 is what number? Okay, so you got it. So there's a solid circle when x is 1 here, when y is 1. And so that's a 0.11. And then as the limit is approaching x, as x goes to 0 of f of x, what do you have there?
Professor, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So, like for example, for f of 1, since there's a solid, like let's say that that solid point wasn't there, and the only point that was there was the open circle, then it would have been does not exist, right?
Correct. So good job. So if the solid circle was not above this and it was just this open circle and there was no closed circle above or below that, you're right. That wouldn't exist, would not exist. So as we're coming in to x equals 0 on the left and the right, because this doesn't have the superscript of the plus or the negative sign, we want to see what is that y value. Are they coming into the same y value, coming in here on the left-hand side and the right-hand side? And they do. right? Yep, and you guys have put it in there. Sorry. I'm thinking I'm erasing and I'm scribbling. Okay. And then, and it's not erasing now. As x is approaching 2 from the right. So 2 from the right, our y value that you get would be, so coming in on the right, I don't know if you see that pencil coming down as I'm drawing or looking at it, but coming down as a right, our y value is 1. F of -1, notice one piece above x equals -1 is the open circle and 1 is the solid circle. And so you're right, you would get 1. And then f of 2, what about f of 2 in this case? What do we get in that case? Right, so there's no closed circle there. It's just an open circle above that x equals 2 at 1. But because there's no closed circle, we would say it doesn't exist, a DME. We're looking at the limit for h as x is approaching 1 on the left. Well, notice there's no piece of the graph. Actually, was that the left? There is. I wish I could erase that. But there's no piece right, or there's no piece on the right of that, but on the left, as x is approaching 1, our y value that we're hitting is -1. If it was asking if the limit exists at x equals 1, I would say it doesn't exist, but it's just asking for the one-sided limit, which on the left, it's getting closer and closer to -1. And then what is the limit as x is approaching 2? So that doesn't tell me left or right. So if I'm getting closer to x equals 2 here, what would that limit be? Anyone know? So the left-hand side and the right-hand side come into the same value. So I noticed that there's actually no piece directly to the left of x equals 2. There's a gap between x equals 1 and x equals 2. So there's no piece that is getting closer and closer to on the left of x equals 2. And then on the right-hand side, I am approaching a y value. I'm approaching a y value of 1. So left and right aren't equal to each other, and so it doesn't exist. Okay, so hopefully you did okay on that, and then things that you had questions about were cleared up as we went over that. Let me stop the recording, and then I think we'll take a break. There are extra things or examples in here that I'm not going to go through in the notes. But if you have questions on them, we can talk about it in student hours. Let me stop the video and we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll start looking at this with equations instead of just graphs.